I'm delighted to be joined by Stuart Davis, a long-term friend of RUSI and the Future of Financial Intelligence Sharing Program, has hosted RUSI activity in Canada and an essential figure of our activity when we're in Canada. Obviously, Scotia is global and you've been involved in our activity around the world as well. Delighted to introduce you, Stuart, Scotiabank's Global Head, Financial Crimes Risk Management and Group Chief Anti-Money Laundering Officer. Thank you for joining us today, Stuart.
Well, thank you, Nick, for having me, and thank you, RUSI, for all that you guys do, as well as FFIS, which is hidden behind you. I can't see it.
In this series, we're really engaging with leaders from public-private financial information sharing partnerships around the world to get their take on the current situation and what they'd like to see in terms of future developments. So, Stuart, you've been a leading figure in information sharing in Canada for many, many years. Could you talk us through your view of the current extent of public-private financial information sharing as it exists right now in Canada?
You know, in Canada, we've been engaged in public-private partnerships, believe it or not, since 2015, when we launched Project Protect, focused on anti-human trafficking, all the way to today, present, where we're focusing our latest public-private partnership, Project Shadow, on anti-child exploitation. We've seen remarkable evidence that these are successful, even when you can't share specific names and private customer personal information. That's not what it's about in Canada. It's about using typologies and sharing typologies and making ourselves more effective end to end as a regime, all the way from the government's FIU, FINTRAC in our case, to the banking sector, to law enforcement, and really following that money laundering all the way through to enforcement. That's what our public-private partnerships are about, and we hope to continue to make them even more effective in the years to come. The one we kicked off last year was Project Athena, focusing on casinos, real estate, high-value goods. So just another example of public-private partnerships that are emerging in Canada and why they've been so successful.
And how long do you spend in that process of looking at a thematic issue at the strategic level? How long does that last?
You know, these last, once we create them and really gain the grounding, which can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months to really get them established. But beyond that, they last. We're still filing STR, suspicious transaction reports, on Project Protect. In fact, we filed, since its inception, over 750 filings have been made with FINTRAC on that particular project.
Stuart, you've been involved in public-private information sharing for several years now in Canada, and obviously leading many initiatives before that. Looking ahead now, for the next 3 to 5 years, where would you like to see public-private information sharing to detect crime get to in Canada?
Well, I still think all public-private partnerships have a long way to go. It's great that we can identify the typologies, get the reports to the government, see the follow-up from law enforcement. But we do want to see regimes such as Canada's regime strengthened even further, where we have greater opportunity for the sharing of information in a secure and privacy-respecting way. We want to see the use of increased technology across not just the banks and between banks, but in ways that will really benefit the overall effectiveness and create fewer false positives for all parties involved. Clearly, you know, when the chief regulator, FATF, comes in and looks at the effectiveness of regimes such as Canada or anywhere in the world, we want to be able to demonstrate that we have a end-to-end effective regime and not just effective in one portion, and the banks are part of that. And that's really a goal of the public-private partnerships. But I'd be remiss to say that if we didn't also continue to explore opportunities to work on the global scale between countries, that's really where I'd like to see it go over the next few years. There's some great examples now of countries that are just starting to share not just within their country, but between countries. And the FIUs at the governmental level have had MOUs and sharing agreements in place for quite a number of years. But I think expanding that to really both the public sector and the private sector on a global scale is going to be very important to me, especially on topics like the CSAM or child sexual abuse material that we've got to put an end to child exploitation.
Yeah, it's amazing in a way that in 2020 we're still, often referring to the fact of how easy it is for criminals to operate across border and how highly networked they are,
and how challenging it is for us.
Right, on the prevention side and the enforcement side and the detection side. Stuart, we do a lot of work within the FFIS program in terms of workshops and support to jurisdictions that are starting off on a process of trying to enhance their public-private information sharing and their feedback back to industry. What would you say are some of your key lessons about what's important to sustain and build a public-private partnership from a leadership perspective?
Well, first and foremost, stakeholder engagement, right? And it's law enforcement, it's the regulator, it's the banking institution, but it's the banking institution all the way from the top to the folks that run the AML programs like myself and the teams that support what we do each and every day. To participate in a public-private partnership takes a pretty significant commitment, but it also takes a willingness to be able to act and to file and do the necessary homework to research typologies. In Canada in particular, again, we don't share a lot of private information on individuals. That's not permitted under the privacy rules, but we do focus on the typologies. So having a clear view of the typologies and coming together as an industry and working on these typologies from a technical perspective, but also from a common understanding and education perspective is key. So education end to end is very important. Full stakeholder engagement, the support of the regulators cannot be underestimated. If they're not there and willing to participate and provide operational alerts or other means of communicating what they're interested in, then it's going to be hard to at least have these things endure like we have with Project Protect.
And what would you say are some of the key risks, key challenges to keep an eye on?
Well, the key risks is, this has always been voluntary. So it changes as leaders change in organizations. And that's an interesting observation we've made. It's as much dependent on the people involved as it is the content. So it can be a very important issue, but if there's not the willingness to be part of that, then it's going to struggle. Other lessons I would reflect on are that it does catch fire when it's successful. It really becomes a key talking point, a key point of evidence for the success of the regime. So removing those regulatory obstacles that get in the way, either perceived or real, is so important to making these successful in the long run as well.
Fantastic. And still thinking about future development, I know Scotiabank invests a lot in innovation and technology to tackle financial crime. The RUSI Future of Financial Intelligence Sharing Program has a specific project on right now looking at privacy enhancing technology around the world. Could you talk us through your interests in that space and what you'd like to see from technologies like privacy enhancing technology to uplift your capability?
Yeah, we're a big believer in privacy enhancing technology, but it's a relatively new field as well. So a lot of our work is exploratory at this point, but it's done so in the context of exploring how can you share information in ways that it remains encrypted in transit, when it's stationary, or when you're performing compute. By compute, I mean when you're doing calculations. Often you can have your information encrypted, but in order to do the calculations, you have to decrypt the information. That's been the historical struggle. Well, times are changing. Now there's technologies such as fully homomorphic encryption, which allows you to do limited secure compute with the information still being encrypted. Having information in the cloud and keeping it encrypted is clearly a goal of programs. And once you've got these opportunities, to keep that information encrypted. You can share securely between governments and banks, between banks to banks, or even within your own bank. We're also working on secure enclaves, which are really, and we're doing this in partnership with Microsoft and the Berkeley School at the University of California. And this really gives us the ability to keep our information secure regardless of where it's held or maintained. And then finally, we're working on what we call federated machine learning. So as you know, there's lots of models and algorithms and AI available in the cloud, but if you put your information up there and it's unencrypted, you're exposing it. So looking at this, and this is work we're doing in partnership with MIT, but how can we train our models that are perhaps multi-bank models used across industry with our private information, keep it secure, get the results back, get some summary level information back that can be shared, but keep that specific customer information private. These are all the emerging technologies, are the ones we're exploring primarily right now. But I can imagine a day where we can do secure inquiries bank to bank to say, hey, what do you know about this customer? We may only know 25% of what this customer's up to, but we share that in a secure way in the future, never exposing the customer information. Maybe the other bank doesn't even know we have concerns on that particular customer, but we know we can find out, yes, that money moved for good purposes or moved for bad purposes, and as a result, make an appropriate regulatory disclosure.
Fascinating, and I think it's really interesting. Obviously, you know, in Canada, there's a very strong privacy regime. Yes. Likewise, in Europe with the GDPR, and it's there that we're seeing, you know, this creativity in use of technology and trying to, you know, see what capabilities can be afforded for lifting financial crime intelligence, but also preserving that underlying privacy of personal data. Stuart, it's been a pleasure to speak. I wish we could speak for longer, and I obviously hope to be back in Canada soon when the situation allows. But for this particular segment, which is really about engaging with leaders from public-private partnerships around the world and understand their take on the current situation and how they'd like to see things develop, this has been fascinating from my perspective. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, Nick, we look forward to seeing you again in Canada.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.